Great to be here. So, just getting my day started here in lovely lockdown Sydney. So it's good to be hanging out with some Bitcoiners.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to get some folks up on stage to join the conversation, but I have quite the outline for you here. But before we get into your work, and again, we're going to kind of touch on a lot of the different narratives and information you've been pushing out. But tell us about like what's up in Australia right now. What's up in lockdown Sydney? I know it's tough out there, but can you just give us the word on the streets, if you will.
Yeah, the government is terrified in terms of on the street. Like I'll set some context. So Australia, a country of 25 million only, despite its size, with the majority of that 25 million concentrated in like five cities. My city, Sydney, a city of 5.5 million people. So like comparable to the large international cities, and we are currently reporting around 400 cases a day. So like these probably aren't numbers that the people hanging out with us like are used to hearing. They're probably used to hearing 10,000 a day or 50,000 a day. So yeah, over 400 cases a day, 63 people in hospital. We've had the economy of 8 million people completely shut down for about 7 weeks, and the economy of 25 million people shut down for about 2 weeks so far. So we led the charge this time around in Sydney, and everyone else is following. And as you may have heard, New Zealand yesterday entered a full lockdown of the whole country, one reported case. So yeah, interesting times indeed. Thank God we have Bitcoin. What can I say?
Yeah, I mean it's chilling to think that like effectively any excuse can be used to completely lock down, right? And uh, at some point it's like when does the utility of locking down end, and like what comes of it is where I kind of I start to have a difficult time with, but we don't have to talk about that too much, other than unless you have any closing kind of thoughts about the situation.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe one day we have environmental lockdowns. So let's talk environmental FUD, shall we?
Yeah, no, great transition. I think before, obviously you've done an enormous amount of work of like putting Bitcoin's energy usage into context about trying to break down what we should even compare Bitcoin to. And on your podcast with Nick Carter was the first time I ever heard you talk about this idea of Bitcoin being a PPE system, philosophy, politics, and economics system. And I feel like that is a foundation for how you view Bitcoin and actually compare it to other things. So, do you want to jump into what a PPE system is, why that's a good framework of thinking and looking at Bitcoin, and we can go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So every significant movement in human history, really significant movement, like came on the back of a PPE system, a total package, a political philosophy, a philosophical position, and or rather a political and economic position underpinned by a particular philosophy. So, for example, communism is a PPE system. Capitalism is a PPE system. Religion, in most cases, is a PPE system. While not all religions are like get down into the nuts and bolts and specificity of economics, they definitely provide a philosophical and political framework for life. And a big indicator of that was the church being the state, for the better part of 2 millennia. All strong movements are usually underpinned, by a trifecta of things. The current state, of globalist quote unquote democracy is definitely pinned The politics and economics are definitely underpinned by a rotten philosophy. Until Bitcoin came along and has presented us with a completely new full stack, that we may be able to use, to achieve far freer and fairer ends.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of potential there. Can you dive a little bit more specifically in how you think, Bitcoin fills the three verticals?
Yep. So Bitcoin, it's like a lot of it is what we make of it and what we project onto it. But just like all of these big movements or religions, they all have some central like doctrine or like or text, holy text or secular text, whatever that lays out absolute basic fundamentals of the philosophy. So some Bitcoiners might call that the white paper. I'd say probably fair enough to use the white paper as a broad frame of reference, and the white paper gives us some extreme fundamentals about Bitcoin's philosophy. Firstly, it requires work, and proof of work is a fundamental principle of Bitcoin that can't really be argued. It calls for a strictly peer-to-peer means of electronic exchange without a third party, and all of the anti-censorship properties that belong to it. And it also makes a philosophical assertion that fixed supply is the way to go, and here's going to be our approach to fixed supply. And this is basically the philosophy that prevents Bitcoin going to zero. So a lot of people ask me, like, how do you know like Bitcoin's not going to zero? Is because I know that like there are enough people that believe in like those three things. Like everyone should be able to send and receive money, like or even just be free to express themselves. Supply should be fixed, and like work must be done to ensure fairness. And I think that's the very very core basic, unarguable underpinning philosophies of Bitcoin, and then obviously the body of philosophy that is built around it.
Awesome. So we got Dr. Jeff, Mike, and P on stage as well. Before we kind of get into what Haas is most well known for, which is his mining breakdowns. I'm curious if you guys can react a little bit to the PPE framework. Personally, for me, CK, I found it to be a huge improvement in how I thought about Bitcoin, and I've pretty much incorporated it into my mental model. But I guess whoever wants to just jump in.
Sure, I can jump in. I think, first of all, can you guys hear me? I'm in kind of a bad reception place.
Yeah, okay?
You're good.
Okay. I think that it's a fantastic framework, and I think it kind of really gets into the fact that Bitcoin is just so much more than most people think. And the further down you go down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin and learn about it, there's just such incredible depth to it, and you can look at it from so many different points of view. It has so many different facets. So I just think it's fantastic. I want to give you kudos that you're doing a great job with how you're describing and giving people a good reference from how to think about it in a more comprehensive way. So that's just kind of my general thoughts on it.
Yeah, I guess I'll say it's kind of beautiful how simplistic it is. I don't want to get too poetic on it, but because the economics silo, you can include healthcare, you can include retail, you can you can include like a country's GDP, you can include anything, and then there's very much the philosophical side as well. So, and then we also just got a huge example of the political side with the infrastructure bill. So yeah, kudos. That was a very well worded way to put it.
Yeah, I don't have anything that I can add meaningfully, but I agree with everything that's been said.
Cool. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining in. And then I guess the reason why I brought up PPE again, because I feel like Haas, a lot of your great work is comparing Bitcoin to other industries. And I think some of your early stuff on Bitcoin Magazine was relating it to other PPE systems. Do we want to, I guess, where should we jump into as a comparison for Bitcoin
Let let
versus energy, Bitcoin versus these different, I guess, staples of society?
So basically, let's talk about like the current state of like what the current PPE is. So the E side, is the crony corporatism. The P is a dysfunctioning. Or the first P, politics, is a dysfunctional democracy, and the philosophy is a purely a Keynesian fiat philosophy. Really, the whole stack is broken, and because it's so broken, it requires a lot of energy to keep going. So what does the current PPE, global PPE stack require to keep going? It requires a military industrial complex like that puts out 5% of global emissions. It requires a finance sector responsible for another 5%, that employs 2% of the world's workforce. The government sector, which surprisingly enough, governments don't spew that many emissions as an administrative unit. Most of the emissions come from the war machine and the healthcare machine, which is responsible for another 5% of global emissions. So it's emissions on top of emissions on top of emissions to keep a fragile fiat system going. And here comes along Bitcoin. Uses a fraction of the energy, a fraction of the people, 0% of the violence, despite recent recent views. No violence necessary in Bitcoin. So at least our emissions may not be 100% clean of carbon at the moment, but they are. Well, I would say 100% clean of blood, but who knows where the power on the other side of the grid comes from. But definitely a lot less blood than the military industrial complex.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a great kind of framework for the multiple double digit percentage of emissions, and we're not even talking about pollution and destruction of habitat and all the other kind of second, third order effects of actually keeping the current PPE system working. But you could even look at recent events in Afghanistan as just like signs of complete and utter waste of resources for very little kind of moving humanity forward.
The situation in Afghanistan is a perfect display of time preference. And I even saw an interview. They were interviewing one of the Taliban guys yesterday. He said, the Americans have all the watches, we have all the time.
Yeah.
So the fiat system, it becomes like exponentially like harder to keep going, and really eventually the few understand that you just have to wait this out, and eventually it can't keep going. Like eventually it just has to collapse under its own size and efficiency. So yeah, very unfortunate scenes, really. But yeah, this is just yet like another one, like in the fiat playbook. Like worst has happened, or sorry, worse has happened in the past, and unfortunately, like likely, like worse will happen in the future. Unless it's stopped, unless we turn like the rotten philosophy around.
Yep. Well, again, when Bitcoiners say Bitcoin fixes this, a lot of people think we're joking, but truly what we're saying is that Bitcoin is a better PPE system to kind of move society and humanity forward. And if you look at the numbers that you're breaking down, is Bitcoin is orders of magnitude more efficient and more sustainable for the planet than the current PPE system. Would love to kind of dive into some of the analysis that you've done, kind of just comparing Bitcoin to these other verticals. Obviously, Bitcoin isn't going to replace healthcare altogether. Bitcoin isn't going to replace construction altogether, but just to put Bitcoin in perspective, often Bitcoin is less than the waste of these industries. So I guess, Haas, do you prefer to start with like Bitcoin versus from the numbers perspective versus the current PPE system, or do you want to dive into some of the?
Yeah. I'll dive into everything, but first I just want to give a blanket disclaimer that I don't want like the energy of healthcare to be like replaced. On the contrary, I want the energy of healthcare to grow 10x. Like, how are we going to solve cancer otherwise? The concern shouldn't be energy use. Energy is good. It's good for civilization, like to use as much energy as we can. We just have to work out cleaner energy sources. So energy like should never ever be a problem. Like, we'll never get anywhere really unless we can just harness more and more energy. I'm very pro-nuclear advocate. Build out as much power, as much clean power as quickly as possible. And I believe, like, because of that, we should all embrace growing energy use. It just means people desire Bitcoin. People saying like, geez, it's actually worth expending energy and paying for it in pursuit of this thing. So energy use on Bitcoin, I believe, is an extremely good indicator of its health. Now, at the moment, people seem to have a bit of a hard on, for the carbon, which is fine. We all want, a clean world. We all want a good environment. Like, we're not here to wreck the environment. But like, basically, these people should not be pointing fingers at Bitcoin. And I've run the numbers on these people. And yeah, like these people, like there shouldn't even be a debate. Like when we talk about the numbers now, there shouldn't even be like a debate. We're talking like Bitcoin being, 0.x of a percent of a sub industry, let alone, world energy. I know, like, Ireland and Argentina get thrown around a lot, but like, all right, they're countries, but how's this for a stat? The Pentagon building uses as much energy as Kiribati. Right? Has anyone even heard? Like, not many people would have heard of the country of Kiribati. It's one of the very smaller ones, but it's a country nonetheless, and the Pentagon building uses more than it.
Man, who knew that the Pentagon uses as much energy as a country? I mean, again,
there's only 100,000 people. There's only 100,000 people in Kiribati.
How many people work inside of the Pentagon building?
Like, it's the largest office building in the world by square meter area.
All right, fair enough. It's a lot less than 100,000, though. Yes, far less than 100,000. So on a per person basis, far less. And like with Ireland, sure, like, millions of people live there, but they don't have like a huge, like, heavy industry. So like, if you were to rank the Department of Defense on its own as a country, it'd be a top 15 country for energy use. Wow.
So when you compare Bitcoin to like big industrial countries, like, it doesn't even compare. So like, it's a framing game. Like, it's a very disingenuous debate to be having. And like in one of my pieces for Bitcoin Magazine, I offer a projection, of the future, and logic will tell us that Bitcoin's emissions will head towards zero a lot quicker than the rest of the world will. And that's just through like economics. We'll seek out the cheapest power. That'll most likely be waste or renewable. We move our modular mining units to the best places, and life goes on. We make money, and we save the world.
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned. Also, can you hear me okay, or am I too hot?
Yeah. No, I can hear you.
Okay,
you're fine.
You mentioned nuclear power, and it always just sticks out to me because it shocks me. I don't know why I'm still surprised, but I am still surprised that people do not understand how beneficial nuclear power would be if it was adopted more widely. And I think it's just, I don't understand how people feel logically consistent when they say many of the things that they do about the environmental impact or supposed environmental impact of Bitcoin, because when it becomes very clear that not only do people not actually care about the environmental impact of Bitcoin, they don't actually care about the environment in the ways that they claim to do, because it just even a cursory understanding of of the landscape would lead you to different conclusions than most people off the street would respond with if you ask them.
Yeah, it looked like a NIMBYism is a thing, and look, that I think that fight, the PR narrative fight, like has unfortunately been won by the eco-terrorists. So like having monitored this, so like a lot of my research started off in 2014. Luckily, I started off right and like used like the IEA sources and all of that kind of stuff. So like every couple of years, all I have to do is like look up the original sources, update the numbers, and see how things are tracking along. And very unfortunately, since I've been tracking it for like 7 years, the global share of nuclear is on its way down. It was like 12% in 2013. And it's around 10% now. But with that said, if a nuclear power plant was able, to find a good location out in the middle of nowhere with no NIMBYism, and was able to secure a guaranteed like customer base for 50 years, like a plant project might be viable. So basically, you wouldn't actually need. So a nuclear power plant, like a good one, could probably only like run 500 containers worth of like mining rigs, and that isn't ideal. You'd be centralizing mining a lot, but like think about it in like a deep future sense. 15, 20 years down the line, privateer. Nuclear power plants, with mining cities and chip fab cities, popping up around the plant. You have 20 or 30 of these around the world, full stack Bitcoin companies that have like a nuclear power plant. They make ASICs. They run a brokerage or an exchange off their mining operation. Like they make hardware wallets, whatever. There's 10 or 15 of like those guys, and then there's like 150 other smaller players also like giving different people their options. When Bitcoiners talk about Bitcoin creating an energy revolution, these are some of the thoughts that pop up. So that's just the example of nuclear, but there's so many other examples. Square wrote a huge piece on just on stranded energy, solar, stranded nat gas, flared gas. Make no mistake, Bitcoin will create an energy revolution, and then as a result of that, energy consumption on Bitcoin is going to increase in the future, and it's going to be like it's going to be a very worthwhile use of energy, and it also will be a very clean source of energy. So from the time I started writing a Bitcoin magazine only a few months ago, the carbon intensity of the Bitcoin network has dropped by a third, thanks to the China miracle.
Yeah, I mean, I think some things that you pointed out that a lot of people who are still posting, Yahoo Finance articles about how bad Bitcoin energy consumption is going to go don't think about is, one, like how the grid works in general. And a lot of the times they don't like think about how them plugging in their Tesla at home is actually touching onto the grid. Part of that is because they don't think Bitcoin's useful. So that's kind of like a base assumption. But again, there's a lot of ignorance into like what actually goes into making all of this stuff work and how Bitcoin's going to work. I think one of the ideas that you've been spreading that is kind of outside of just your analysis of, energy usage across the globe is this idea that Bitcoin is like the greatest charity. And part of it is because like, obviously, we're seeing across the globe that Bitcoin is this accessible open source infrastructure that people in Cuba, El Salvador, Africa can tap into, where they had no access to any sort of financial infrastructure outside of, kind of cash or whatever was available via their banking systems, which wasn't much. And you kind of have this like idea of like, I guess Bitcoin, one, is going to support this energy infrastructure across the globe, but two, it's going to support this financial and monetary infrastructure as well, and people can be a part of that infrastructure by just buying Bitcoin consistently. So I just think that it's pretty interesting to see, like, one, there's complete ignorance to like the infrastructure and how it works today, and then two is like Bitcoin is kind of creating this backdrop for this infrastructure to kind of get built across the world, and funded by everyone across the globe.
Yeah, look, the charity aspect of it, the DCA militia. I'm renaming it from the DCA army to the DCA militia. That was a very funny term for it that our new Army Space Force friend introduced. So basically, when you provide, like, a base, a good like, and unfortunately is related to price. When the price is upwardly stable, that is either only goes sideways or up, people become a lot more brave to shell out $2 billion on a nuclear power plant to service the Bitcoin mining industry. So not everyone believes in Bitcoin as much as we do, and these mega projects really do require a very, very long time frame from an investment base that isn't used to having a long time frame. But thankfully, we don't need such an investor base. We can pretty much do it ourselves with only really little investment. So little, I'd call it charity. So as long as enough of us do it, things will continue to improve.
Awesome. I mean, again, I love all your stuff. Harry, welcome to the stage. I guess join the conversation.
Yeah, well, I apologize for not being in here earlier. I guess the perspective that I would bring to the table here is, like, I'm the buyer of all this energy, or if things go well, I'm the co-developer of net new energy, and so, like, I say that not because, for no reason other than that, when people tell you that Bitcoin is doing something bad, or that there's some nefarious activity going on as it relates to the energy consumption profile of our beautiful network, they're wrong, and they're malicious in their framing, right? So they're either fully uninformed or they're actively malicious. There is no argument that Bitcoin mining and the energy consumption associated with it introduces net new impact to emissions, to grid instability, to any of the boogeymen that are being bandied about. The reality is that Bitcoin miners want to buy the cheapest electricity on the entire planet. I know because we've looked, and we've been really good at it so far as an industry. So what we've done is we've found energy infrastructure that's been built and designed for the worst day over the next decade. And we have to build the entire system around stability in that extreme edge case. That's a good thing. It's a good thing that our heat doesn't go out on the coldest day, or our air conditioners don't go out on the hottest day. It's a good thing that grandma and grandpa are going to have access to medical devices with reliable energy every waking second of every single day for the rest of their lives if we build this thing correctly, right? We can all agree that that's a high value society that we're bringing to the table for everybody. How do we do that? We need to make sure that the energy that we generate has a buyer attached to it. Otherwise, we won't quote unquote overbuild average demand enough to make sure that the edge cases aren't catastrophic to cohorts of people within our population. How do we do that? How do we make sure that revenue is well supported across the energy generation community? We buy their power, or we partner to build their power. How do we make sure that the power gets bought? The way that we make sure that the power gets bought is no megawatt hour goes unsold. How do we make sure that no megawatt hour goes unsold? I don't think that's what happens in practice, but it's an aspirational vision that we have at Grid. The way that we make sure of that is we sign really flexible and really unusual, based on sort of the fiat model, power purchase agreements with the energy generation that makes sure that we are engaging with them on an economic basis that supports monetizing every megawatt hour that we possibly know how in a really attractive way to us, the Bitcoin miner, and also in a really attractive net new, the keywords are net new way to the power producers. These are megawatt hours that never got sold. They were getting pushed into the negative range in Texas and other power markets. They were in the low single digits on a megawatt hour basis in the open market pricing. What do? We provide a revenue enhancement strategy, which is we're gonna bring in a second buyer to these marketplaces that sets a floor price and offers a continuous bid to these generation folks that says you will never have a megawatt hour fall below X threshold so long as you deliver to us above a certain performance. These are contracts that never existed without Bitcoin, and specifically never existed without Bitcoin miners, right? Bitcoin is fundamentally a technological innovation. That's just the truth, right? It's a computer science breakthrough. It also unlocked a bunch of other innovations in adjacent industries, one of those being power generation. Huge 0 to 1 breakthrough in the kinds of contracts that can be struck. Right? Like we cannot overstate how valuable this innovation is and the good that it's going to do for our society and the bountiful economies of Bitcoin access that it's going to bring to the table, because what Bitcoin mining means is it's an equality of revenue, right? We talk a lot about equality of opportunity in Bitcoin spaces. We talk a lot about equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. What Bitcoin mining does is it introduces equality of revenue to all power sources everywhere on the planet.
Man, that's so well said.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're saying some beautiful things here, Harry. And I think what you're touching on too is like this aspect of Bitcoin where it brings energy online or makes it liquid, and it creates profit opportunities that didn't exist before. And there's a lot of other ways that you can point to how Bitcoin is going to enable this energy network to develop that potentially even nuclear network that Haas described. So it's really awesome to kind of look in a forwards perspective and even philosophize how much energy Bitcoin can use as a percentage of the energy used on the planet. But before kind of getting into that, it's interesting to think about how tiny Bitcoin's energy usage is today, and how much utility it creates compared to, again, just the waste, the offset that these other major industries are doing. So again, I'm going to pass it to you, Haas. This is your expertise.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Harry. Like that was spot on. I could not have said it better myself. 100% right. Like, these people, generally speaking, are liars, and like one of the challenges we have to face now is the successful conflation of the lie of energy and emissions. The narrative is that energy is bad. You're using too much energy. It's bad. It's bad. Energy is good. Emissions are bad. So never let anyone tell you Bitcoin is the best use of energy that has ever imagined. So don't let anyone tell you that Bitcoin is a waste or not useful. But I digress. Let's have a look at total numbers. So I usually I get lazy for a reason, because the Cambridge name is strong. So I just rely on the Cambridge numbers. I always take these numbers with a grain of salt, because no matter what number we quote today, the number the actual number is going to be different in about an hour. So there's no real point to reporting, how much energy does Bitcoin use in a year. But anyway, according to the Cambridge model, which I assume hasn't been updated too much since the China migration, estimates Bitcoin's energy use, somewhere in the area of 70 to 80 terawatt hours per year. That's 70 and 80, so not in the hundreds or the thousands or anything like that. let's just be like super conservative and assume like that all of the Chinese exodus completes its migration in soon enough, and we're back to 100 per year. Global energy use is at 170,000. So really, like it's fine that, you know, like we use a bit, like, you know, okay, we use a bit more than Ireland, but that just means like, wow, well done, Ireland. You like you're really keeping it low in the global scheme of things.
Where can listeners like go and find that data consistently? I know you've written a number of pieces. I just think those kinds of stats are so important.
So there is an aggregator. It's run by Oxford Uni. It's just called Our World in Data. And they pull a lot of their, so they do have a section on energy emissions, and they generally pull their data from the IEA, and also from, you know, funnily enough, BP, British Petroleum, has one of the most reputable global energy reviews out there. And it's not surprising at all, actually. You'd expect an energy company in the private sector that lives and dies by making money from energy would understand the energy market pretty well and have some good data. So Our World in Data, like you can have a look in aggregate, world, OECD, by continent, and even down granular by country. So a lot of good data there. So I think it's just ourworldindata.org as one word, or you can search for it on your favorite search engine.
Awesome.
I would recommend checking out the articles. The articles are very well sourced.
And where can people go to find those articles?
So go bitcoinmagazine.com. You can click on that Michael Saylor tweet that's pinned to the top of this chat as well for the most recent article, which is very comprehensive. But I'll go back to you, Haas. Sorry I interrupted.
Yeah. So I reiterate that. So when you click on that tweet, if you just click on my name when you open any one of my random like articles, you'll just see a list of everything, and there's data on pretty much anything you can imagine. So it's a treasure trove that gets added to quite regularly. So it's a good place to look. And I know many of you will probably already be following me here on Twitter. If you aren't, that's where you'll find a lot of my stuff as well. But I suppose it's time for the show really, and to really have a look at numbers in context. Now with the Cambridge site, I also recommend people look at that. That's cbeci.org, cbecky.org, the Cambridge Bitcoin Energy Consumption Index. They've got, you know, a dynamic little chart. They've got a lower bound estimate, a higher bound estimate, and whatever estimate you take, it all ends up as rounding error. So we got to Bitcoin being, you know, in the 100 terawatt hour range out of a total of 160,000. You know, let's have a look at, you know, the numbers, you know, some other industries are hitting at. So Bitcoin in the hundreds. Let's have a look at, you know, some of the transport subsectors. So Bitcoin at 100, air transport alone at 40 times more at 4,000. Shipping 40 times more alone at 4,000. You know, our cars 170 times more at 17,000. Now, again, going back to my blanket statement, I'm not saying stop driving cars. In fact, I'm saying go find yourself a V8, because even a V8 pollutes, unfortunately, less than the current grid. So a lot of, as CK was alluding to earlier, a lot of people, you know, are plugging their Teslas into a natural gas grid, you know, which emits, you know, 480 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. Whereas a regular gasoline car is closer to around 250. So too is jet fuel, for that matter. So if there's any anything like more exposing, like to say that jet fuel and diesel fuel is literally cleaner than our grid by 30 to 40%. I suppose that, like, that really suggests that, there should be quite a bit of impetus in possibly discussing putting nuclear back on the map. But I digress. We'll have a look at some more industries. So my beloved industry that I'm currently working in now, the construction industry. So just putting up new buildings a year and getting our concrete and our steel and all that, 60 times worse than Bitcoin. Military industrial complex, global military industrial complex by itself, 70 times worse than Bitcoin. Finance and insurance on its own, 50 times worse than Bitcoin. Now going to like far broader things, like keeping the lights on in all of the buildings all over the world. That's 375 times worse than Bitcoin. And even gold, which is 3 to 4 times worse than Bitcoin and far dirtier, looks angelic compared to banking, or healthcare for that matter. So I suppose like showing these extreme numbers, I'm hopeful of at least making the debate less serious. Like I don't think this should be a debate. This it should just be more of a one-directional, one-way valve educational movement. Like there is no debate. The debate is over. It's like, here's the numbers. Like, I hope we don't have to debate this like anymore. Can we start working towards the aims of a cleaner grid? And how can we as Bitcoiners help you achieve those means through being your buyers of last resort?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that framing, and again, I think you're completely right. Like, first and foremost, the premise that energy usage is bad is dangerous, frankly, but it's flawed. And then beyond that, the idea that Bitcoin alone is causing any sort of economic catastrophe is ludicrous when you just compare it to everything else that we're doing and just how tiny and minuscule it is in terms of the energy usage that it's demanding.
Yeah, what do we do with the fact that those numbers are still not considered, right? Like when the articles that were written about the Lake Seneca, steaming away, which were total horseshit. There was a fantastic Bitcoin magazine piece that went into all the actual data, and in fact, in the years before the power plant started mining Bitcoin, the lake was actually hotter. But none of the actual facts mattered. That article got picked up, and people just ran with it. Like, how do you think we effectively address the fact that people are just lazy and the narrative machine is very powerful?
Look, the narrative machine, it's an extremely well-funded machine. What can I say? Like, people have been getting, like, I remember, myself, being like a kid growing up in the 90s, getting bashed over my head with this stuff subconsciously. Being primed, green. And look, like, I am 100% on board. Like, as a civil engineer, like, we are very passionate about clean water, not wasting, the landfill, crisis is a crisis. We see ourselves as environmentalist, low time preference people. So I'm on board with all of it, or not all of it, obviously. I'm on board with the fundamental essence, but again, I think this whole, as we were talking about earlier, I hope we don't go into environmental lockdowns one day. the environmental, you have some sincere, caring, people that are unfortunately being used by forces unseen, as a means of control. And a great way to control people is through control of their energy.
Yeah, there's a broader piece of framing here that's really important to think about, which is, to what degree are we willing to allow the organs of power to define and mandate payment for a perceived public good, right? Like it feels like this is actually the thematic element we're dealing with, whether it's COVID or climate or quote unquote extremism or actual extremism. Pick your sort of issue du jour, and like the economic force that's being applied to the lever on the fulcrum is, what do we define as a public good, and how willing are we to empower a central actor to to correct for something that is defined as a public good, right? So in the case, and I say this with no opinion at this level of the analysis around what's right, wrong, good, bad, shouldn't. All we need to do is identify the mechanics that are at work, and then we can try to make other types of judgments or other layers of analysis around how these things work. But basically, like using global warming is a really easy way to unpack this mechanic. The environment is a public good. No individual actor has any responsibility to maximize for the public good, because we have an alleged body of science that says these types of behaviors in aggregate will produce a defined outcome that is observable, and we, the central point of control, have a responsibility to make the public good delivered in a form that we've defined. COVID, same situation. The reason I'm allowed to tell you, the individual, to make a different choice is because there's a public health mandate that I'm defining for myself, and I'm going to roll out a set of tactics to achieve this this intended public health outcome that that now we're going to roll out. The problem is when the public goods are defined by the people utilizing and writing the script for the tools that are available to them to correct the public good that they have also defined, right? It's a classic conflict of interest. So we need to understand the environment in this way, and basically say that there is a tremendous public good that comes from Bitcoin. Bitcoin needs to be just so overwhelmingly and obviously positive that these arguments are laughable on the face, which I think is really achievable.
When you say that it needs to be, you mean that it needs to be perceived as such? It
Correct.
Already is. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, perception is reality.
So, I mean, that's the thing, though, right? Like, how do we? It just seems like such a challenge. I mean, I know we're all working to create that world in different ways, but it's just.
I don't know. I mean, I think we're just part of the grind every day. It's harder to zoom out when you're in the trenches. But the reality is that it is happening. More people today believe that Bitcoin is good and necessary and understand that than yesterday. And that's not stopping. And at some point, there's a critical mass, as well as just a real reality that Bitcoiners are better off than people who are holding fiat. That kind of implements that. But what happens in between, I think this idea of like eco-terrorists is interesting. They to some degree you could argue they are terrorizing for the whatever the jihad of the economy, the ecosystem, or whatever you want to call it.
CK, honestly, Greta, she seems like she has been terrorized. If you listen to her, she is genuinely, we're not going to try to read into this girl's intentions or whatever it is, but genuinely, she comes across as somebody who has been terrorized, by the environmentalist. So these people are eco-terrorists. Like they are terrifying people, and and like now is like we've seen they're starting to like try bring the force as well.
I think the solution is actually just simpler, right? Like if you know, of this population, like none of them are giving up air conditioning, right? So like all you need to do is introduce Bitcoin as something that obviously makes their lives better, and they won't actually take steps to
that. Okay, Harry, that's actually something I've been waiting to see if it gets said. So I agree 100%, and I also think that part of the solution is actually public health. I just wrote an article with Bitcoin Magazine about basically how the public health, like the general population's dopaminergic system, has been getting hijacked by public health since the 70s. They've been pushing like the high sugar diets. They were actually claiming sugar was good for your diet back in the 70s. And then through processed foods and manufacturing, those high carbohydrate foods have gotten more and more potent, and then that's getting expounded upon by social media and this very high digital use society. So I think you're right, Harry, and I think it's getting worse through public health, and which is helping them drive these narratives worse. Like Haas brought up about the or I believe his P brought up about the factually incorrect lake getting cooked by Bitcoin mining. I think that it's all playing a massive kind of exponential role.
I was going to say, CK, I totally agree with you. Like, we are making progress in this regard. I'm just impatient. I think it is inevitable. We're going to get there, but I want it to happen faster. And I want to know what I can do to make it happen faster.
You're just in the trenches.
But let's be really specific and serious here. Like, there is an audience of, I don't know how many people in here, a couple hundred, almost 200 people. Go build something useful with Bitcoin. Seriously, like, go start the next Bitcoin company. Maybe let me invest in it. But actually, like, go make this useful. Go get your friends to DCA. Go make this a part of everybody's economic and financial diet. Like, come on. The point is that this is a tremendously useful thing, and so we get more people using it. We build better services on top of it, and we do the thing that was hard. Let me and the miners focus on the laying of the fiber part of the new paradigm rollout. But like, someone else needs to be building the apps, and somebody else needs to be building all of the different things where Bitcoin is a 0 to 1 unlock. So if you were nervous or not, starting the business or writing the code, go now, go make, go do.
All right, Bitcoiners, I want to tell you about our newest sponsor. This show is brought to you by Ledn.io. I have been super, super impressed with the guys over at Ledn. I've actually known the co-founders, Adam and Mauricio, for a very long time. I've had the pleasure to watch them build Ledn up from a tiny, tiny startup to now a super impressive institutional grade Bitcoin and crypto lender. Y'all, I'm so impressed with these guys. They are offering some of the best rates out there. I don't think anyone even comes close to touching them. You can get 6.1% APY on your first 2 Bitcoin that you deposit into Ledn interest accounts, and you can get 8.5% on USDC deposits. I mean, I know all the competitors. They're not even close. If you're going to put your crypto and your Bitcoin into an interest account, Ledn is by far the best. And on top of that, like I said, these guys are hardcore Bitcoiners, and they know the products and the services that Bitcoiners want and appreciate. They come up with B2X. It allows you to put your Bitcoin in, they leverage it up, and you can, with one click of the mouse, get twice the exposure to Bitcoin. So if you're super bullish, Ledn has you covered with a super, super easy way to get leverage with B2X. And then on top of that, they know that Bitcoiners care about your reserves. They know that Bitcoiners don't like under reserved and not full reserved financial institutions. So they are pushing the frontier in transparency in the digital asset lending space. And they are the first digital asset lender to do a full proof of reserves and proof of attestation through a Mariano LLC, a public accounting firm. So the Ledn guys, they know what Bitcoiners like. They are legit. I encourage you guys to check them out. Do your own research and go to Ledn.io. That is LEDN.io and learn more. Bitcoiners, I want to tell you about The Deep Dive. The Deep Dive is Bitcoin Magazine's premium market intelligence newsletter. This is a no fluff, hard-hitting, incredible newsletter going deep into the market, helping you understand what's happening with derivatives, what's happening on chain, what's happening in macro, what's happening with the narrative, and what's happening with the tech. My man Dylan LeClaire is an absolute savant. He is making his name known in the Bitcoin community, getting shout outs left and right, getting on podcasts left and right, and him and his team are bringing you everything that you need to know about Bitcoin. You don't even have to be on Bitcoin Twitter. You can ignore every other newsletter. This is the newsletter to rule them all. Go over to members.bitcoinmagazine.com, sign up today, and if you use promo code MACRO, you get a full month for free. You have nothing to lose. What are you waiting for? Sign up, see the incredible work that Dylan and his team are putting out. And if you don't like it, just unsubscribe. You don't pay a dime. But if you do, it's going to be well worth the sats in investment in understanding Bitcoin and gaining the confidence to continue to invest in Bitcoin and making the right moves around Bitcoin. And it's going to be well worth every single Satoshi. Again, can't recommend it enough. That is members.bitcoinmagazine.com, promo code MACRO. Do it today.
And also, just supporting the larger community is also huge. A bunch of us got together and we're like, you know what? We don't understand how Lightning works and we want to learn. And we created Plebnet. And now there's, hundreds of people in there, thousands of people in the group. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do as an individual to support Bitcoin and your own understanding of Bitcoin and have an outsized effect because we're still super fucking early.
I remember a few years ago before joining Grid, I was talking to my dad about Bitcoin, and he's like one of those, like, he's down to be like, he's on orange pill light, right? Like he's still living in the world of Bitcoin's better gold, right? Like it's going to be $20 trillion market cap. It's going to double gold, and I'm like, all right, well, if that gets you to buy Bitcoin, great, but
pretty bullish.
Yeah, exactly. Like reasonably bullish. Willing to put it to work, but not like hyper Bitcoinized. And I was talking to him about the decision to make a career change, and like my thesis was not that Bitcoin mining was going to rule the world, though now I've come to believe that. My thesis was this is something that I think I can be pretty uniquely good at, and there are no experts yet. So if I do this for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, like there'll be 25 people on the planet who've done as much Bitcoin mining as I have. It's so early. Like that opportunity lives along every vertical in Bitcoin to just like pick something, go super deep. Like, P is brilliant at this, and doesn't get the credit I think he deserves of like what it takes to build community and build, shared knowledge around a specific niche within the most important monetary asset the world is ever going to see, at least in our lifetimes. Like pick a niche and go. And like the time and the accrual of value and relationships that can happen right now, you may never see, you will in all likelihood never see this again, or in your children's lives or in your grandchildren's lives. Like you don't get a lot of swings at the plate. And so yeah, I'll get off my soapbox, I promise. But it's just like, it's so exciting.
Don't stay on the box, please.
If I could just jump in and just say that, like, this idea that you can be a Bitcoin expert in a world that is quickly going to realize how short it is on Bitcoin experts is absolutely an enormous opportunity. And I would throw out there to everyone who's in the space, every little thing you do in the space is building towards the space. It doesn't have to be going as far as like creating a project. And I would just say that Bitcoin Magazine is here to kind of like be a platform for the community too. So even if it's just as small as contributing to the magazine or joining one of these chats or whatever, or sharing an article, that's part of kind of like moving things forward. So everything is good for Bitcoin. Like it's really this kind of black hole of just sucking in good energy, I think. And there's just so much opportunity because we are so early. And that's definitely an incentive for me is like, what happens when you're in this industry for 10 years, 12 years, and it's a 20-year industry and the biggest thing in the world, that puts you in an awesome position to benefit. So, I think this entire community, everyone who's on this call has that potential. Haas, what do you have to say here? Where's your soapbox?
I want Harry back on the box. That's been absolutely fantastic. So if what I didn't say earlier about how miners are going to take over the world, if you didn't believe me then, I hope you believe Harry, because they will. And like like the just like the big oil guys, in the early 1900s. Really, this is where like the Bitcoin mining industry will be, at the end of this century. It'll if you draw things to their logical conclusion, and if you guys are bullish about Bitcoin and you guys think Bitcoin's going to be 10 million a coin in 10 years or whatever, and 50 million a coin in 100 years, then how is Bitcoin mining not the biggest industry in the world at that point? So Harry's 100% right. Like if you want a career in Bitcoin, you've got a 50-year career if you want it. Get up and go. Increase demand for Bitcoin the best way you're able to.
Yeah, increase demand for Bitcoin the best way you're able to. I want to go back to kind of your DCA militia idea. We have a lot of new people here, but again, Harry was kind of saying, people need to go out there and build, and you kind of make it even smaller and an easier barrier to entry.
So like at the fundamental basics of the trench, right, is the sandbag, right? And anyone can fill a bag. So just fill your bags, add them to the wall, and everything will be okay. It's simple as that. The wall will be won. You don't have to be the person like designing the cruise missile. Like if you can't do anything but like fill the bags, just fill the bags. How's that for like a wartime trench analogy? All characters are needed to win the war.
I think it's more than that, though. I think you're absolutely right. But at this early stage, I think, like as you said, just hodling Bitcoin, taking custody of your own funds, controlling your own keys. I think it's that simple act is almost like building a factory. In the analogy of the war effort.
Haas would push back that it's not hodling is great, but it's not the same as buying regularly.
I use those terms synonymously, but I do agree with you. Buying regularly, DCA.
So that makes the sandbag wall higher and higher.
Yes.
Or adds more layers to it. and what's it called? And really it's not even it comes back down to PPE. Philosophically, if you're on board with the ideas that everyone should be allowed to transact, that finite supply is the way to go, and that hard work and verification is the way to fairness, then there's no reason to just not migrate. So if you're like me, still mining fiat, there is no excuse for me every time that fiat is mined into my bank account to not migrate it over to my philosophy. In a recent DCA piece, I referred to DCA as the daily charitable act. So it doesn't necessarily mean just buying. It's increasing demand for Bitcoin, to the best of your abilities.
The only thing with that, though, is that I think people associate charity with giving away, giving away value. And for me, I agree with you. I think it is a charitable act. I think you are improving the world by doing it. And I also think it's so compelling because you are also putting yourself and your family and the people that you care about in a stronger position. So it's like charity for others and charity for yourself.
It's very extremely rare for such a thing to exist in the wild, except for when politicians start charities and their donors miraculously start getting big contracts.
Exactly.
So you can get richer for donating, but Bitcoin legit enrich your soul, if nothing else, because that's a very good philosophy to hold. That work is fairness. Yep. Everyone should be allowed to express themselves freely, and we think that fixed supply is the way to go when it comes to monetary policy.
Haas, I really love this kind of framing. I guess you go pretty deep in calling it the most important charity there is. I think part of that is kind of hung on this idea that fix the money, fix the world, Bitcoin fixes this. But let's just go a little deeper into, why dollar cost averaging, buying Bitcoin regularly is the most charitable thing you can do, and why, resurrecting or building this fair financial system is the greatest kind of common good project that can be done for the world.
So disclaimer, like I love El Salvador, the people of El Salvador. Like I'm not a huge fan like of Bitcoin in El Salvador at the moment, but for different reasons than like what people usually hear. The reason I'm not a fan is like, even though like I live on the volatility and like it doesn't matter because like I mine fiat, I live in Australia, like my life is good. Like it's fine if Bitcoin goes up and down. Like it's not fine if it goes up and down for El Salvadorians. And eventually Bitcoin will stop going up and down. And it's not going to be that far away. But for now, Bitcoin is in a natural state of either like down or it rips up like 10x. So like it's and the reason it does that obviously is because because there's a sort of a relatively fixed supply and highly varying demand. You have quite a bit of volatility, and this is very extremely normal for something still as small as Bitcoin. But with that said, Bitcoin is so small and the human population is so big that just by creating a floor demand of a couple of bucks a day between a couple of million people in long-term equilibrium will cause so much buy pressure that Bitcoin just stops going down, and it literally either becomes sideways or up only. And some may call this the flattening. Some say that this will only happen at the flattening of the S curve, and impossible to happen while still monetizing. If we fail in our pursuit of stability, at least we filled a lot of bags, and at least we're not the ones on the tarmac chasing a plane.
Man, you really know how to put things into perspective, Haas. I have to give you that. I guess just to kind of add on to that, yes, Bitcoin is not at the state where it is ideal for the people of El Salvador to use, but really what they are is kind of very, very early adopters to folks relying on Bitcoin's monetary network as payment rails and as like just basic financial infrastructure. So, a lot of people
absolutely,
in the first world don't have that issue,
no.
And they're just kind of have no other choice because it's just the only other option that's there, and that's why it's up to us, right, to get the price to where it needs to be.
100%. So that's why. So even though I'm not the biggest fan and I'm very nervous for them, I'm gonna try to do what I can, like to make sure their downside like isn't 70%. Luckily, it looks like they've timed near the bottom, and like they've wrote out like the really rough part. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But like Bitcoin really starts fixing. So Bitcoin fixes this in a few ways. So one Bitcoin will always be one Bitcoin. So at least the El Salvadorian like can start. All right, a Satoshi banked is a Satoshi saved. A Satoshi earned is a Satoshi saved, or whatever the framing is. The fact is they have stable infrastructure to build a base off of, and like no one can steal their wealth. And I'm extremely happy for them that like they finally have a good opportunity at this. But unfortunately, because like they can't like they're not in an economic position to handle the volatility. Like I just feel nervous for them. But I'm like every transition has to have some volatility towards it. You can't just instantly go from a bad situation to a good situation. It does require someone to make a move. And ultimately, if the entire third world is to get out of their rut, like we've got to get them on a Bitcoin standard like El Salvador. Like I'm just nervous of like setting them up to fail. But like I'm sure everything will come good.
I think it's a realistic thing to be nervous about. I'm going to let my man Phil up. I think he has a question, but after Phil, I would like to jump into your article where you kind of project out and talk about your thinking around Bitcoin's future energy use, and then from there, I'm going to let folks up from the listener group onto the stage to kind of ask questions and direct comments towards you. So let's start with Phil, and then we can go into projections for Bitcoin's future energy usage. What's up, Phil?
Evening, Seth Stackers. How we doing?
Yo.
So just a quick thing I want to address, maybe like a hybrid question, but in regards to the volatility in El Salvador, God forbid anyone sells their Bitcoin, but with the Strike wallet that the government of El Salvador is working on, they can sell at market price for fiat with no capital gains tax if they don't want to deal with volatility. And yes, again, God forbid anyone has to sell their Bitcoin. That is awful. But if the merchant wants to do that and just hold fiat dollars, or maybe hold on to the Bitcoin longer and sell for more fiat dollars later, whatever they want to do, they're able to do that. And even though that they have to part with those sweet sats, those actually are going into the fund a Bitcoin at, I guess, the government wallet of El Salvador. And then once that reaches $150 million in fiat terms, then that goes back into infrastructure, which is a greater alternative than relying on the World Bank and IMF, who just constantly fucks countries. And, the Federal Reserve doesn't do much but perpetuate that. But like, as far as volatility in El Salvador with Bitcoin, if that option is available, I don't really see where volatility really becomes a concern. It's just a matter of educating the public over time and then discovering what Bitcoin is by having it in their own possession.
No, very true. That's why I'm on net, very positive and hopeful for El Salvador. Like I was saying, if they want to go from bad to good, they'll only get there with Bitcoin. And I think like the El Salvador success story, when it materializes, hopefully it does, will be like there'll be a lot of copycats. I think a lot of people will just be watching and waiting and seeing, and while they're watching and waiting and seeing, they're looking at the price. And if we can just either make it go sideways or only up, this drives confidence. And like in the numbers I put out, like it does not take a lot of investment to sort of like hold Bitcoin's floor price. It's very little, like when compared to typical investment flows. So for example, like the current daily inflation of Bitcoin is only about $40 million worth. Which is nothing. It's 15 billion a year. Like if the price was the exact same now for the for a year, like the 16.5 billion worth of Bitcoin would have been mined. Like this is like, we're talking like that's per year, and this is like 1 hour of Fed expenditure, like over the past whatever it was, 11 months. So like fundamental flawed, like sure, there's lots of people that buy and sell and trade, but typically if you're a trader, if you're buying and selling Bitcoin, or like the money's still in the system, like it's all still on exchange and like ready to go. Like the price might like come and go a little bit, but like you can barely treat that as volume. Not a lot of people are like running for the exit with intent in Bitcoin. It's mostly like just wash trading and like a couple of really big entities trading between each other. So if $40 million of like fresh money like hits DCA exchanges every day, like it might not get immediately, but just through attrition, cell walls just get eaten just through attrition, just daily, just a torrent of daily money. It is quite possible. And again, if it all amounts to nothing, that just means a little bit of Bitcoin in millions and millions of hands. And that then becomes a very interesting proposition.
I say, anyone else on stage have thoughts towards what Phil and Haas just said? P or Mike?
No, I am literally just soaking it all up, and my brain's kind of melting right now. So no, I don't really have a whole lot to add right now.
I just wanted to say, Haas, I admire your brain. I wish I had it, and I love your shit. So keep it up.
Oh, thanks.
Awesome. I guess before we go into future Bitcoin energy use, JT, let you on stage. What's up?
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering for the short-term investor. I mean, it sounds like you fellas have everything invested. You're an established mining company, but for like someone on the small level, like, okay, it seems like a very fluid market. So if I were to buy, let's say, 1 Bitcoin today, it seems like if I leave it in the market, it would gain or lose, correct?
Yeah, all stay the same.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, we're not really into trading, so I apologize for cutting that one short. But more focused on the long term of Bitcoin, and I mean, again, I guess the idea of it would gain or lose on the market is, I guess the idea there is like if you're willing to trade, you are in position of losing your principal. But if you're not trading and you're just holding, then even if the price goes to zero, you still have your Bitcoin. So not to say that's a great circumstance, but you can't lose it.
I'll go.
P, go for it.
I was gonna say, I'll go a little bit further on that. I would not advise anyone to try to trade Bitcoin or any other so-called cryptocurrency. There are extremely well-informed people that you are trading against, and whatever edge you think you have doesn't exist. You will get wrecked. If not on your trading, then just capital gains tax, which will destroy you. So you should really be, as Haas was saying earlier, like just DCA in if you don't want to put in a large outlay right now. Just set up a daily buy using any number of services. That is the best possible thing that you can do for yourself and for, I would argue, the world when it comes to Bitcoin. Don't try to trade it. Just DCA in, not investment advice.
Yeah. I'll
savings
I'll
advice.
I'll be a little like degenerate. Like you got to give yourself like, you got to get a little interested at first, and then top it up DCA. Like if you're working, so a lot of people say, oh yeah, you got to put like 1% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. You got to put 10% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. Like if you're young and you're working, like don't worry about your portfolio. Just figure out how much of a percent of your pay you can put every week into Bitcoin, and that's it. Get yourself interested, get some skin in the game early on, and just have the mindset of never ever selling for fiat. So not never ever selling. Just don't plan on just like converting it to USD or converting it to some other, fiat shitcoin. Hold it with the mindset that one day I'm going to be able to spend this. Like someone's like, I don't have to change it back into fiat. You have that time horizon. If you're still young, you're still working, and you save with every paycheck. Within a couple of years, you'll see that 80% of your portfolio is in Bitcoin anyway. Like even in bad years, like DCA has been pretty good, because when Bitcoin tends to spike, only spikes for like a couple of weeks, and then you're buying back in the dumps. So when it recovers to its like eventual high, you're back up triple or quadruple. So lump sum definitely is better than DCA, except for all the times when it isn't. So take from that what you will.
I guess that's similar to it might go up, it might go down, or it could stay the same.
So, Haas, to get back to Bitcoin's energy usage and kind of your projections of future Bitcoin energy usage, can you reiterate kind of the premise of why you think the emissions, pollution, etc. of Bitcoin's energy usage is going to go down? And then maybe you can kind of give an overview of the numbers to back that up.
Yeah. So Harry said it best. Bitcoin miners are in the business of profitably mining Bitcoin. So to that end, they will seek out the cheapest energy in the world. And more these days, that is tending to be just stranded energy, or energy that is produced and has no customer, as Harry put it far more accurately. So in terms of like world energy production, I told you earlier that we produce over 160,000 terawatt hours of energy per year. Only 110,000 is consumed. 50,000 gone to waste. Enough, for over 500 bitcoins. Like not bitcoins as in BTC dollars. Enough to power Bitcoin 500 times over. Just energy that gets like generated and not consumed. Yeah, it's quite cheap. Bitcoin is go to it where they can, and they're making deals with the grid where they can. But the projecting the future requires projecting quite a few things. So you need to be able to make, obviously, a projection on the price. If price is zero, no one's going to be mining Bitcoin. And if the price is 50 million a Bitcoin, everyone's going to be mining Bitcoin. So like you've got to be able to, so I've made predictions for 5 and 10 years in the future. And I don't think anyone has even ever made an accurate prediction across 5 or 10 days for Bitcoin. But I've tried my best. The second thing you've got to predict is the state of technology. So how efficient are rigs going to be? So when I first looked, this in 2014, you had the Antminer S3, and it was cutting edge. It was 100 times better than a GPU. One of like the earlier ASICs. The current Bitmain top of the line model, the S19J, is something like 500 times more efficient than it. And back in 2014, everyone was saying there's no way ASICs are going to get more efficient. Like we've got Moore's law, and they've pretty much been doubling their efficiency every single year without fail, like ever since. The mining world is starting to get very good, at overclocking and immersion cooling, which will increase efficiency, even further. And basically, as the years go on, even though, let's say, hash rate will go up 10x. The energy required for that 10x in hash rate is only really about 2x because machines are getting so efficient. So the third thing you have to predict is whether the governments are going to make good on their promises. So world governments have this thing called the Sustainable Energy Scenario that they've committed to with their grids in the year 2030. And to be quite honest, like the grid in 2030 actually looks pretty good. It looks like it's improving dramatically. The grid in 2030 will be as clean as Bitcoin currently is in terms of carbon intensity of grid. So Bitcoin's been really good at beating governments to date. You can almost predict that they're going to be really good at beating governments, in the future. So it all boils down to then, Bitcoin is effectively going to be emissionless in the future, and it's not going to take long, simply due to economics and the agility of the mining industry, as in being able to just, move your rigs, where power is cheapest. It sounds, it's harder than it sounds, obviously. Just to move rigs, but it's not that hard. There are harder things with that much money on the line. There are much harder things than moving a Bitcoin operation, despite it still being quite hard to do. So there's a lot of numbers involved. There's a lot of like scenarios involved. But effectively, no matter like how high the price goes, in 10 years time, Bitcoin really isn't likely to be using much more than 5 times its current energy use, which in the global scheme of industries is still like really, really low. And if Bitcoin does grow to the point where it's using 5 times as much energy as it does now, it will probably be the largest industry in the world itself in terms of a market cap.
So I mean, 5 times from where it is, biggest industry in the world by market cap. If you look on sites like Asset Dash or alternative.
Oh no, I mean by energy. So traditionally, every like doubling of energy use, we've gone up like 10x in price. So if we're using 5 times the energy, like you're looking at like a $20 million Bitcoin. So it'll be the biggest financial industry as well.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely massive, but still in terms of just overall energy usage.
Still nothing. Still less than the
nothing.
US Army.
It's so efficient, right? Like that should be the framing, right? Like these other PPE systems are hugely wasteful compared to what this can bring and the utility this can bring.
This only requires energy. That energy need not be dirty. No bullets required. No bombs required. Just energy. It's look. It's probably not the best like jobs creator because the rigs like tend to look after themselves to a small extent. But like the industry built around serving the mining industry, I think is going to be a big jobs generator. In terms of ESG, Bitcoin is good for the environment, it's good for society, and it's good for governance. What can I say?
Again, full stack PPE, and it's much more efficient when you actually look into the numbers. I love the framing here. I hope all the listeners are taking notes because it's sometimes it's easy to get caught off guard with someone who's militantly anti-Bitcoin because of energy usage, and you should be able to push back. And this is the information you need to know. Sovereign, what's up? Sovereign Stoic to the stage. I know you're a miner and you've been involved in a lot of these conversations. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, guys. No, I'd just like to say that's a great point. What Fryer was talking about is as the overall network grows and the market cap grows, this is something that Lynn Alden has spoke about many times. The amount of value that's transferred per transaction grows exponentially, but that energy use doesn't grow in linear manner towards as the value gets transferred. So because of the efficiency of the machines, and because miners are incentivized to seek out the lowest cost energy all over the world that is stranded and otherwise not even used, the value actually provided to transferring across the protocol goes down as the market cap rises, and this is a beautiful thing. But Fryer, I wanted to ask you a question also. What's your opinion on the fact that we may or may not be bumping up against the end of Moore's Law in terms of chip efficiency, just because we're down to 5 nanometer chips now, and we're having trouble with the electrons jumping between channels. So in that regard, the new ASICs are actually projected to last for the next 5 to 10 years. So in terms of future efficiency gains in hardware, what's your opinion on that?
I think the gains are going to be coming from the overclocking and cooling. So it's still like early days in like the immersion cooling space, but like early tests, people are getting a reliable 190 terahash out of a S19J. So that leaves the factory at, I think, 100 or 110 terahash. So that is a 70% efficiency gain, technically speaking, at the outlet. So you're still using your 3 kilowatt power supply, but you're getting 80% more hashes. Now, like there'll be a lot of trial and error. Uh, Look, I don't know enough about like the hardware engineering of ASICs to make a one way or another statement. But I know at least in like the peripheral stuff, like cooling, there are some good efficiency gains to be made. So like if you've got a good like immersive cooling setup going, and you can resurrect and like really highly overclock old S9s. This that's a in its own right a big efficiency gain over what we currently have. But just generally speaking, in terms of chips, one of the predominant reasons we're not going to probably more than 5x our energy usage, no matter what the price does, is like there's no chips. Unless like maybe a Bitcoiner in their full stack nuclear city, in 20 or 30 years time builds a chip foundry. Pickings have been slim for hardware, so it's just going to be very interesting to see what happens. But like miners are very, very good at finding profit and being profitable. So you're always going to continue to see a huge innovation from them.
Not to go too off topic, but now that you bring that up, and Sovereign mentioned that the new generation of miners can last up to 5 years, does that really negate the issue of not having enough fabs and the whole like lackage of chips? I mean, if we can just sustain this hardware and it gets that commoditized, does that really, for a while, get rid of that problem?
So it all boils down to price. So like so you can't make chips, and like there's like economic rules will tell you like in long-term equilibrium, when things are like calm and steady, the cost to mine a Bitcoin is around about like the price of a Bitcoin plus a bit of a profit margin. There's a operational component to your cost. And there's a capital component, which is buying your rigs. If chips can't be made and rigs can't be secured and Bitcoin price goes through the roof, your power cost stays the same. So naturally, rig cost will go through the roof. And this is one of the reasons why like old S9s and S19s and all of the rigs have pretty much tracked Bitcoin's performance dollar for dollar. There's no new stuff out there. So let's just say this situation endured and Bitcoin went to 10 million a coin. Like it'd be worth spending $1,000 to try repair a S9 and run it. So it really just depends on the price. And like if you can make profit mining Bitcoin, you'll mine Bitcoin. If you can't make profit, you don't mine. But like price will play a big role. And also if let's say, price got to 10 million a coin, who's to say TSMC will just tell NVIDIA and Intel to like go somewhere else because, they've got a customer in Bitmain willing to pay us, 10 times more than NVIDIA is, because their customers will pay anything for an ASIC. So this is why predicting the future is so futile, but also sometimes so fun. Just mapping out potential scenarios. But yeah, you can't bet on anything or be certain about anything. Just spitballing and speculating and just talking about natural incentives.
I was just gonna say what you can bet on is the bullishness of the incentives and just how beautifully naturally placed they are and how that just like propels innovation.
Designed to NGU technology, my friend.
And what you can bet on is that hash rate go up. So it's interesting to see that how fast the hash rate is rebounding after the China exodus. So Fryer, what's your over under for the end of 2021? Are we going to be over 150 exahashes? I know.
I made a bet with Zach.
CK might have a bet on that as well.
Yeah, I made a bet with Zach. Look, here's how I see it. All right, let's say, I don't have a Twitter presence or anything. I'm just got my factory in Sichuan, pumping out, 10 exahashes or whatever it is. and I'm and I'm clearing $2 million a day, and I've got 10,000 machines. I've got three options. I've got all involve pack up. So one is pack up and move. The second option is pack up and sell the rigs. And the third option is pack up and go bankrupt. So like it's pretty simple, and like the incentives are quite large. And if those are your three choices, like you'll find a way to move, or you'll find a way to spend $80 on each one in slave labor, just cleaning them up and getting them ready for shipping. Or you just, cash flow is more important than your mother. You sit on your ass for a couple of months, you go bankrupt, and then your rigs get sold at a fire sale anyway. And for me, that is like natural incentives. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much as like a construction guy, but like I like to look at things like from the reality of it, and that's the reality of a miner in China. He can either leave, or he can go bust, basically, and he's got two ways of leaving: either moving himself or selling the rigs. And also, I'd imagine, I remember back in late 2013, I wrote like a little investment prospectus for like my family. I wish any of them ever bought it or read it. But the only the headline risk I nominated in late 2013, the only risk I could think of was China is thinking of banning Bitcoin. Then in 2014, China is thinking of banning Bitcoin. Then in 2015, and then in 2016, and then every year. And then earlier this year, they said, all right, we're serious about it, guys. In May, you guys are out. Like, figure it out. Like, I'm pretty sure like the big guys have been like figuring it out like for a while. We're ready for it. And yeah, they're slowly making their move. Like, it's not easy to move. Like, you can't do it in a day. But 3 to 6 months, yeah. Yeah, I can very easily see 150, especially with the addition of like the regular production stock. So Bitmain would have pumped out, like, not just Bitmain, obviously Bitmain, Canaan, all of the big fabricators. They'll probably pump out like 15 to 20 terahashes worth of kit over the next 6 months as well. So I just see it from an incentives point of view. Unless you're really, really, really wealthy, I don't see like just locking your rigs up in storage as like a viable use of your investment, especially one that depreciates so quickly.
Just to jump in from like a business perspective, we've been speaking to lots of Chinese-based mining firms that are very, very serious about making moves into Eastern Europe and North America. So, they're not packing up, right? I'm sure there are people who are packing up, and obviously they're not the people we're hearing from, but there are a lot of players who are very serious about taking the hash rate, taking the business, taking their brands, and going to jurisdictions that are friendly.
Can I jump in for a second? I guess I joined this room because I had a sneaking suspicion that this conversation was going to come up about the future energy consumption, and I guess I want to try and shift the framing a little bit, at risk of opening a can of worms. But and also I guess Sovereign explicitly pointed out Lynn Alden's latest piece. I just can't really parse the idea that there is some kind of 5x ceiling on Bitcoin's energy consumption, and from my understanding, this sort of logic boils down to to a premise that the energy consumption is tied up to the price of Bitcoin, and it could be that so far that has been true. But I suspect and I have a very, very strong suspicion that this will not be true in the future. I personally don't see any ceiling to Bitcoin's energy consumption, because when the actual block subsidy fades out, miners will be mining for fee profit, for transaction fee profit. And there is also no ceiling to Bitcoin's transaction fee profits. As Bitcoin monetize, you should expect it to settle quadrillions of dollars on chain, for which you can assume, even with a very conservative 0.01 basis point, that's actually what the market, that's where the discussion about mining being one of the biggest, if not the biggest industry in the world comes in, is that the profit that are to be derived from mining Bitcoin because of the fee generated from the on-chain settlement will be in the trillions of dollars. And when you consider this sort of what some people like to claim security budget, but I'm not very much a fan of the term, but when you consider the bounty for trillions of dollars in fee from mining Bitcoin, obviously efficiency comes into the conversation. I do believe that we're not going to see 2x energy gains anytime in the future. I think those are far gone. Surely you'll get improvement because of cooling, as you've mentioned, and overclocking, but I think there are diminishing returns there. So I don't know. Like I made some very naive calculations as far as like what this kind of bounty for a fee revenue from mining Bitcoin in a monetized Bitcoin future could look like. And we were talking about like what would be the equivalent of petahashes of energy consumption, like a significant portion of what is today's
I totally agree. The 5x limit was tied to the year 2030. I think
Okay,
by the
I
time we
wanted to
get
ask
to block
that.
subsidy, Bitcoin is going to be the biggest industry. Like we are going to use the most power. But because there's going to be, like you said, like quadrillions settled. But over the next 10 years, I think because of the chip crisis, I don't think we'll be able to get enough rigs to really do more than 5x. But after that, if we monetize, like everybody will be falling over their feet to manufacture ASICs for us. Yeah, 100%. If the volume of fees is going to be worth billions a day, miners are going to expend like billions, like trying to capture that profit. 100% agree.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important notion because I think people have this assumption that somehow, especially in a fee-based environment, miners will be incentivized somehow to mine Bitcoin, or there's this notion that we need enough security, or that there's such a thing as too much security. And while you can have this conversation today, by the time the actual subsidy fades out, that goes completely out the window. And miners, you're not going to tell miners that's spinning up rigs and connecting to, or even building new power plants or whatever it is, to stop mining because there's enough security. They're mining because they want to capture that profit.
100%.
And so I think this is I think people need to very much consider this notion, because it's very important to understand then that the FUD around Bitcoin will not have enough security from the hash rate once it transitions to a fee-based security model. Is completely absurd. The security will be what the market is willing to pay for it, and so the only scenario really where Bitcoin doesn't have quote unquote enough security is a scenario where Bitcoin fails to monetize. It fails to capture enough of the global value settlement system. At which point, it's not a reflection of the actual security model. It's not a reflection of proof of work. It's simply a reflection of Bitcoin not succeeding. Obviously, I think most people on stage and probably most people listening don't think that's going to happen. But I think it's a very important thing to highlight, because we're going to get into that conversation a whole lot more in the future as we get closer and closer to the halvenings that are coming. So I think people should consider this.
Just throwing it out there, that's pretty ridiculous that people are so confident about what's going to happen in over 100 years from now.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at projecting what's going to happen 6 months from now. So The fact that people are willing to have zero exposure to Bitcoin because they're so confident about what's going to happen 100 years from now is pretty insane. And I would say maybe be humble and stack some sats.
Yeah, definitely. Well, but to be fair, like the fees are definitely like they're going to be concern like in within one halvening or two from now. I would expect like we're getting to pretty low
I don't even know if
inflation.
we can know that. If
I
price
mean,
goes
no,
up exponentially, then how do you know that the block reward can't sustain it, just like the 6.25 block reward is sustaining it perfectly fine today?
I mean, you'd have to account for like how much. Yeah, it could be, but I think you have to account for when exactly, like the amount of value that Bitcoin will have to capture once it monetizes. I would expect that it monetizes within like two halvenings. So I guess we'll get the answer then. But I see your point.
We're lucky to be alive to watch it live.
I think although like I think we see. I think the trend is not obvious because obviously, like we're still in a context where fee revenue is pretty much bottomed actually now. But there is some kind of there is certainly overall. What's encouraging to see overall is like if you really look back, there is at least some kind of trend in terms of mempool density throughout the years. And so you cannot observe that the mempool is getting more dense and more packed with transaction. Of course, it empties out every now and then, and you have periods where, but we're definitely like overall the market on a year-on-year basis is certainly for transaction is certainly more active than it was, I don't know, 3 years ago, without like taking out like the Bitmain spam that happened in 2017.
I'm glad that you bring up the spam, Alex, because there's been speculation that Chinese miners in general have just been spamming as a practice in order to keep overall fees higher in order to increase profitability. And now that they've had to shut off en masse, we're kind of coming back to a normal state of the market. Do anyone that's on the panel give credence to these speculations or have any color?
Well, personally, I think it doesn't make much sense. I mean, I do know. I mean, I'm pretty confident that it happened back then, but it was a deficit activity for Bitmain. Like they were losing money doing that because obviously you're paying for the spam ultimately, and so it's not clear that the returns like overall like you'd accrue more revenues overall from what you pay
does it take to trigger all the automatic recommendations on wallets to tick up?
Yeah, well, that's another good point. I think it was a whole lot easier back in 2017 because the wallet infrastructure and the wallet ecosystem was a whole lot less developed. The fee estimation algorithm were in a lot of cases, people using blockchain.info and whatnot or exchanges, and that was pre-SegWit as well. So I think it was a whole lot easier to sort of clog the chain. I don't see how it would be very feasible today.
Bitcoiners, let's take a break from the content, and I want to tell you about Coolbix. Coolbix is an awesome Bitcoin hardware wallet that's been around for a really long time. They are building an amazing Bitcoin wallet called the Cool Wallet Pro. The Cool Wallet Pro is state-of-the-art Bitcoin hardware wallet technology. Its form factor is like a credit card. You can put it into your wallet, and it is designed to go with you on the go. So that way, even when you're on the go, you can have the benefit of a two-factor hardware wallet design when you're trying to spend your Bitcoin. So you can have your Bitcoin wallet UX on your phone and make it really easy to scan, decide what you want to do, but then you sign with a Coolbix, which is in your back pocket. It is tamper-proof, it is waterproof, it is flexible, it has an awesome secure element in it. And it is a really awesome way in order to have some more flexibility, yet security when you're taking your Bitcoin on the go. I personally am a fan of, this idea of making Bitcoin into a medium of exchange and making it into something that people use. I know it's going to take time, but they are working on the UX for making that possible in as secure a way possible. So have some peace of mind. Check out the Cool Wallet Pro from Coolbix. And yeah, thank you to them for sponsoring this podcast. Bitcoiners, I am so excited to tell you about the Bitcoin 2022 conference. You guys, Bitcoin 2021 was absolutely a smash hit success. It was over 13,000 Bitcoiners coming together, breaking the barriers on who can come together and celebrate freedom, celebrate Bitcoin, and the energy was absolutely electric. Unfortunately, it was just oversubscribed. There's just people flowing out everywhere. And this year we are learning, we are making the conference bigger and better. We are moving over to the Miami Beach Convention Center, and we are going to be throwing a massive 4-day festival for Bitcoin, celebrating Bitcoin, bringing together the greatest minds in Bitcoin and the greatest businesses in Bitcoin. And lastly, the culture of Bitcoin all together. We have a 4-day extravaganza planned for you guys for Bitcoin 2022. Day one is going to be Industry Day. It is a day where you can buy a special ticket in order to just mingle and make business deals happen. Day 2 and 3 is going to be a full-blown Bitcoin conference. This is our main conference. This is going to be on April 7th and 8th. And then lastly, we have the Sound Music Festival, Day 4. Imagine going to Coachella, but for Bitcoin. There's going to be very few talks. It's going to be all about the culture of Bitcoin. It's going to be all about hanging with your fellow plebs. It is going to be an absolutely amazing time. There's going to be Bitcoin musicians, Bitcoin artists, and all your favorite Bitcoiners, and just an amazing environment to party and just see it all, soak it all in, and to get people to realize that a Bitcoin world, a world filled with Bitcoin people doing Bitcoin things, is the world that they want to live in. That's what Bitcoin 2022 is all about. That is what the Bitcoin conference is all about. That's what Bitcoin Magazine is all about. So it is going to be a celebration of Bitcoin, the Bitcoiners, and this amazing movement that is going to make the world a better place. Go to b.tc/conference, learn more about the Bitcoin conference, learn more about all the amazing things that are happening in Miami around the Bitcoin conference, and buy your tickets. And guess what? If you buy your tickets with Bitcoin, you save $100 on all the tickets and $1,000 on the whale pass. So if you want the VIP pass, the big kahuna, if you buy with Bitcoin, you save $1,000. That's a lot of sats. So go and do it right now today. Don't wait. Prices are only going up. This is going to be a can't miss event.
So where do we go from here? We've been going for almost an hour, almost 2 hours. I don't know what your day looks like. It's just starting over there in the APAC region, Haas. But I guess do you have more time? Should we start wrapping things up?
Yeah,
Do
no,
you have
I've got
anything
some.
that's on your chest?
Yeah, I've got some more time. Literally, like I said, house arrest. It's a beautiful thing.
Gosh. I guess now that it's been some time since you kind of introduced your situation. Do you want to talk about what's happening in Sydney and recontextualize maybe what the deal is there?
Yeah, so we're flattening the curve at the moment. See how it goes. This time around, it was 21 days. So we're on day 7 now. So it was 2 weeks, became 6, and then we restarted the clock, and we're going for 21 now. So the army's out on the street, making sure we stay home.
That is,
believe it or not.
it's fucking wild, man. Did I hear you correctly at the beginning? You said because of one single confirmed case in the entire country?
That was New Zealand that closed over one
okay.
case. Where it like it's quote unquote starting to get like bad in Sydney. Like we're up to 400 cases a day. But again, for the Americans listening in, for the Britons listening in, like they're used to hearing 30,000 a day, 50,000 a day. So for a city, our size, we think it might have been a knee jerk, but yeah, like I said, thank God for Bitcoin.
This is also why guns are important. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it is, but I had no say in it.
What's the perspective in terms, or I guess what's the sentiment amongst the average Sydney city dweller?
Depends. It is quite a polarized issue. So the original leak was in like the very rich eastern suburbs of Sydney, and like there wasn't a single cop. And then like it spread to the western suburbs of Sydney, which is like blue collar Sydney, like the main population base, the main workforce. Some would call the undesirables, and they've sent the army. So like the people are polarized, they're very distrustful. The government started to set like vaccine goals. And they didn't even order any vaccine. So even if you want to get vaccinated, like you can't. They've recently made like a huge push. Just general mismanagement. They thought if they trapped us in the country and wouldn't let us come or go, that there's no way COVID would ever get back in, and we'd be gravy. But it managed to find its way in, and hopefully. We're not like the canary in the coal mine, and aren't just 2 or 3 months ahead of the rest of the world. Being winter now here, and I hope you guys don't have to. You or the Europeans don't have to go through this in the winter time. But it looks like some countries are intimating shutdowns again over the Delta strain. So like they're all liars. No one tells the truth. You don't have like really any good statistics. You can't really plan your future movements very well. All you can really do is grit your teeth and stack sats, because eventually like Bitcoin will even fix things like this.
All right. I mean, again, I'm sorry that you're in this state. I'm hopeful that me being someone in the U.S., that the U.S. is
not taking notes
system has some resistance, but we'll see. Has Let's get back to Bitcoin's energy usage. We have a lot of folks in the audience that are part of the mainstream media. Different reporters have been kind of popping in and out, and I'm curious where we've talked about projecting Bitcoin's energy usage into the future. We talked about comparing it to waste of industries. We've talked about comparing it to other industries. We've talked about how Bitcoin is a full political philosophy and economic stack project, similar to a government or the church in the medieval days. I guess, where do you want to go from here? We can repeat some of this stuff as people are kind of coming in and out, but I guess turn it back to you.
Yeah, it's the simple mantra. It's like Bitcoin is good for ESG. It's good for the environment. Its energy use is a rounding error. Its carbon intensity and emissions are decreasing, by the day. And will eventually, become nothing or negative, thanks to offsetting of flared methane and whatnot. Second, Bitcoin is good for society. It gives people property rights. It's economic infrastructure on which to build your future. And it's good, for governance, because you actually have to be honest and transparent. Because you can't print your way out of your problems. Now, I don't know if it's good for the governors, but it is certainly good for governance.
Yeah, for the governed, right?
Yeah.
For the independent people, and it gives you more sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first, first real, form of unseizable property. If obviously, your correct precautions are taken in your custodying habits. But if you've got your custody down pat, you can smile as the bullet heads towards your face, but they will never ever get your money.
Yeah, I mean, I love your sense of humor, Haas. I wanna, you touched on this, and I wanna dive a little bit deeper. You talked about Bitcoin offsetting emissions via the flared methane projects. I would love to kind of get the numbers behind off-grid mining, flared gas mining, and kind of what's happening there. Again, I think the backdrop is that Bitcoin needs energy, not electricity, and that there's a lot of stranded and wasted energy that Bitcoin can utilize and even make more efficient, more economic, more environmental. But Haas, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, so in a timely thing, there's that little Twitter bot that tracks, Jack Dorsey's movements, and he's, recently followed Steve Barber, and the only data I have on in terms of, how much flared methane is actually being used in Bitcoin. Like I have Steve's numbers. I don't know how big the number is worldwide, but there are several people mining on flared nat gas. So basically, with nat gas, and oil, it's a issue of you got to spend money to make money. So if you want to pull gas out of the ground, you got to flare a bit of it. And when you flare this methane, it's 25 to 100 times more potent in terms of global warming potential than carbon dioxide. So the way they make it less potent is they just light it on fire. So like instead of being 100 times worse, it only becomes 3 or 4 times worse. What's happening now is that Steve's tuning up old Chevy engines, and they're pumping flared gas into these engines, and that power is being cleaned up and being sent into little huts that sit right next to the flare. So the US alone flares enough methane to power Bitcoin 3 times over, and the world flares enough methane to power Bitcoin, over 20 times over. And if we dedicated all of our flared gas to mining Bitcoin, we'd probably double or triple the hash rate, and reduce like global carbon emissions by 2% or whatever it is. Methane is a huge factor. So like if there's anything, Bitcoin is risking global cooling. Not quite. I'm not sure that global cooling works that way or not.
What if the future FUD is Bitcoin is freezing the oceans and we must stop Bitcoin because it's preventing the greenhouse gases from keeping the place the right temperature?
We can either boil oceans or freeze oceans. Choose one. If they're
No,
frozen,
honestly, I think the narrative, we've already seen this, right? The narrative is so off basis from what the truth is. I think people, I mean, who knows what it will be next, but people will shift their frame 180 degrees and they won't even bat an eye. They'll be like, yeah, the things change. You'll be like, what changed? What happened? And they'll be like, oh, look over there. And that'll be the end of the story.
they'll be like, what are you talking about? I've had Bitcoin since 2005.
You're right. That's exactly what it's going to be. I've always had Bitcoin. I was born with a Bitcoin in my hand. My father had Bitcoin and his father had Bitcoin.
And his father was Bitcoin.
Just want to holler out there that if anyone on listening wants to come on stage, request, I will vet and let you on if I believe that you would be a good panel member. But let's continue. And, at some point in the world, people can say that. There are children who have been alive, not one day of their life was without Bitcoin in existence, and potentially without Bitcoin in their lives. There's a lot of Bitcoin babies out there, and Bitcoiners, the hardcore ones, the ones on Twitter, the ones, calling their family members, trying to get them to jump on and start DCAing, join the DCA militia, build a citadel. They're about having kids a lot more than many other people these days. So, you can kind of expect this cohort to grow.
Well, that is, of course, because they can afford to have 12 kids.
Don't worry. Stack now
Because
and Satoshi
Bitcoin.
will pay.
So, do we want to talk about current events at all? Haas, I know you talked about how bad our current fiat nation state PPE structures are.
Actually, you know what? I do want to talk about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So I put out a tweet
let's
yesterday,
do it.
and
Yeah.
and you can find this link in my Bitcoin magazine article on Bitcoin versus the military industrial complex. So in that article, I had a look at US Army, EU and NATO armies, UK Army, and in my research on the activities of the US Army, I found a great report written at Brown University, and they catalogued the emissions generated by the war on terror from 01 to 2017. So not just Afghanistan, I suppose. Iraq was a contributor to that number, but the war on terror wars, so the emissions by the US Army, not the entire coalition of the willing, and only up to 2017, so not the past several years, was over 1,200 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalents emitted on the war on terror. Bitcoin emits 20 per year. So that's 70 years worth of Bitcoin, which is now currently, you could almost say, like in its peak. So that's what Afghanistan and Iraq have cost. If you don't want to talk about the trillions, if you just want to talk about the emissions, there's 1,200 in there. And if you want to add, the coalition of the willing, maybe increase that by 30%. So was that a good use?
Yes.
Of,
So
of emissions?
what is this? What's the stat line? Just for the audience to weaponize it with their tweets. What's the stat line of Afghanistan and Iraq versus Bitcoin?
75 times as many emissions, or like, it's hard to say because that 20 is a yearly stat for Bitcoin. I have to go back and calculate everything Bitcoin has ever emitted, but basically Bitcoin will never ever emit not even like a little fraction of the post 9/11 wars. Because if at our peak we're getting through 20 megaton a year, so it would have been less last year, less the year before. Well, actually a bit more last year because we had a lot of Chinese coal. But I'd say in Bitcoin's entire history, it's probably produced 100 megatons of carbon. This is like less than this is a year's worth of unjustifiable war.
It's absolutely ludicrous.
So there's the weaponization, like the war on or rather the war on terror emits in 1 year what Bitcoin has emitted its entire life to date. Like that'd be putting it in context.
But Bitcoin allows terrorists, and the war on terror stops it.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
I think what CK is really asking is, why do you hate freedom?
Yeah. No, I hate it. What can I tell you? But that's but at the end of the day, at its logical conclusion, Bitcoin fixes the terrorist problem. Eventually, it's hard to draw together every dot, cross every T, dot every I. But eventually, the end resolution is that if everybody has a way to peacefully accumulate wealth and property, and have sovereignty over it, this will solve a lot of social issues.
So one thing I would say is I want to push back on that a little bit. How does I think it gives the possibility of that, but how does Bitcoin? Yeah, the possibility. It doesn't mean that will definitely happen, right?
But there are some things that just take away complete possibility, from being so. For example, these people that join the Taliban, these people don't have possibilities in their life. They've got nothing. So you join the Taliban. There's no economic infrastructure available for them to build wealth or start a business or learn or educate themselves. They've got nothing. They've got no possibilities. So it's a very throwaway when you say, oh yeah, Bitcoin fixes this. But at the end of the day, if you give people legitimate economic infrastructure, it opens up possibilities, big possibilities. So the Talibans of the world won't have as big a pool of manpower to draw on. If youth unemployment wasn't a disaster in Afghanistan, there wouldn't be a Taliban for example. And the reason like youth unemployment is a disaster is because they don't have good economic infrastructure, be it physical or digital. So Bitcoin at least ties down like the digital economic infrastructure.
Interesting.
And it's very cheap. Like it's very expensive to build a road or a highway. Very cheap to airdrop in Bitcoin and Bitcoin wallets.
So I would even say that, yes, it creates the digital infrastructure, and that's something that obviously is not tied to any geography. But ultimately, in the longest run, it's also the impetus for building out the physical infrastructure needed to power and give internet to the world in the most efficient
But not just that. Coming from someone that lived in the third world for quite a while, it's not about building roads. It's about building useful roads, not a highway to the president's house, like what happens in Lebanon and like Uganda and all of that. Like like the third world. So Bitcoin as a solid like economic monetary standard, obviously will then push and incentivize, efficient, public works projects. The who will build the roads question. It's like the people that are the best at building like the best and cheapest, most efficient roads, and like these are things, that Bitcoin fixes in the long term. Like literally, Bitcoin will build the roads. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm gonna make you talk about your PPE as well as Bitcoin is the greatest charity idea again. But before then, Aaron Wise, Daniel, welcome to the stage. Aaron, I guess you've been waiting longer. Do you want to jump into the conversation? Both of you, feel free to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to jump in whenever it makes sense. Just talking about the whole energy thing just makes me like to reiterate that everyone is allowed to buy their own electricity. I feel like the general conversation should start at that point of private business owners are allowed to procure electricity at whatever the prevailing market rate is in their area and buy it and use it for whatever purpose they would like. I think that's first and foremost. Secondly, the whole Bitcoin mining being this terrible thing for the environment is just entirely overblown. It looks like 190 or so terawatts going to Bitcoin mining versus like 160,000 for the world. So 160,000 versus 190 is the comparison that we're making here when we're freaking out about Bitcoin mining. So and also like over half of that is hydroelectric and various forms of captured or wasted stranded energy. So I feel like that's just kind of the general perspective that I bring, and happy to chime in and help wherever the conversation is helpful.
Word. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I agree. Again, we don't really know the exact energy mix. Haas estimates that it's much better than any energy grid. As just full stop, if there were, freedom to buy electricity on a completely free market, then yes, Aaron, you're correct that is the case. But unfortunately, in much of the world, that's not the case. And amongst much of the population in the world that are under some delusion that think that energy usage equals bad and that there should be some sort of top-down restrictions that might be under jeopardy. Daniel, welcome to the chat. Again, you're at Microsoft. You're a Bitcoiner. You're building on this, and you've been building, within technology for a long time. Feel free to jump into the conversation. Feel free to jump in now.
Hey there, guys. So yeah, I mean, obviously the ESG stuff is something that a lot of the companies, like mainstream tech companies, care about. But one stat that I like to throw out that we've used internally with our own folks is like, I'm like the clothes dryer guy, right? Like you using your clothes dryer, which is a complete waste. Honestly, you could just hang your clothes and have the environment do it for free. Costs about 4 times more than Bitcoin every single year. So every single year, just from people being lazy, essentially, they are destroying the environment 4 times faster than Bitcoin would if you believe in that sort of thing. And from that perspective, I think we're all just monsters. And maybe maybe we should look at things a little differently. So that's, that's kind of where we're at. And, honestly, like, I think one of the things people argue is that Bitcoin isn't good for anything. So what is it doing for that 1/4 of closed dryer energy? And what I would posit it does is it obviously makes decentralized value transfer possible. But for us, what we're using it for is for giving people identifiers that they own and control, not Google or Microsoft or some government, as is the standard today. So those things are incredibly powerful. I think they're the foundation for people being self-sufficient and independent. And we believe on it on our team at Microsoft, and we think it's a fantastic use of energy. Certainly better than making clothes dryer.
Hey, what's
And
up,
Daniel,
guys?
thank you. I appreciate the clothes dryer analogy, and I agree. We're all monsters, but yet, with that being said, more energy usage is the goal. Just better captured, and we need better allocation of capital, which is, I would argue, not possible under fiat. But Jay, welcome to the stage, and welcome to the conversation.
What's up?
I pulled you up, Jay.
We're all dastardly ocean boilers here, Jay. Would you like to boil the ocean with us?
I'll take his silence as an absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, the comparison to dryers is apt. Almost any other comparison that you'd like to make. Always on devices, listening to us in the privacy of our homes, opting in. What else could we make a comparison of? Just
Has Alexas versus Bitcoin.
Well, I know data centers are 200 terawatt hours, so that's ahead of Bitcoin. And that's electrical use. So with energy use, you've got to convert that factor up. So Aaron mentioned a very important number, the 190 terawatt of energy. So that's probably the most accurate number to use. So the number that's on the Cambridge site, the 80 terawatt hours, that's electricity. So to actually get 80 terawatt hours of electricity, you've got to go through around about 180 terawatt hours of energy. To account for conversion and transmission losses and all that kind of stuff averaged out over the grid. So thank you, Aaron. Actually, that's probably the most intellectually honest number. I like to fight intellectual dishonesty with mild dishonesty. But either way, whether it's 80 or 180, it's still a rounding error. But I know that data centers take 200 terawatt hours of electricity. So if you scale that up, that's triple as much as Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, and just compare it to China, we have something they probably use. I don't know if the world is at 170, they're probably at 40 or so. They consume a tremendous amount of energy. U.S. is probably close behind, something like 30,000 terawatt hours. So you're talking about a margin of error. It doesn't even matter what number you pick between 80 and 200 terawatt hours. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. Also, I think the conversation often misses why are we even talking about it in the first place? Again, coming back to a private citizen can buy electricity and use it for whatever they like. That's legal. Why do we not talk about the cost of Netflix servers? Why do we not talk about the environmental destruction that's being caused by hoverboards or electric skateboards, or why are we in particular talking about Bitcoin and its individual impact on the environment versus not talking about the other things as well?
I would push back, and I'm sorry, I know you're about to say what you think, so I guess I will let you say that, and then I'll push back.
Well, I just think it's a threat to very particular types of politicians, the incumbents. So we are proposing the ability to do something privately regarding value and conducting business with other people. That is not the type of activity that they'd like. So they would like, they can come up with a bunch of arguments, and I think this is just one of many that's going to come. To say, hey, no, you should stop that. That's destroying the environment. Which before this, it was a Ponzi scheme. Before that, it was for criminals and money launderers, and before that, it was. It's always going to be some argument. So this is just the latest in a long series of arguments because it's disrupting the power that they would like to keep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really the crux of the argument is the Bitcoin disrupts the power as well as Bitcoin just disrupts in general. Bitcoin disrupts incumbents across the board, and this is very low-hanging fruit. There's a hilarious screenshot I have on my phone of a Fortune article that was published on the internet saying that internet pages and like people reading their news on the internet is going to destroy the environment. So, and the coal emissions from that. So, this argument is centuries old. It was also made by people talking about gold as well. So Nick Carter just published on Bitcoin Magazine, making this analogy and kind of going through that history, which is extremely interesting. It turns out that the fiat standard requires more energy used towards mining gold than a gold standard, according to Nick and his research, which is also hilarious, and kind of points to how fiat itself actually wastes energy and destroys cap and makes it difficult to have proper capital allocation, which is kind of the root problem here. Before we even talk about this stuff, Aaron, you did talk a lot about like this idea that we have a right to purchase energy, and I agree that in an ideal world that is the case, but Haas would characterize the eco-terrorists are trying to change the public sentiment against that. Like, how does the panel feel about just the public sentiment around energy usage and the idea that the public, the masses, politicians will try to stymie electricity access for nefarious purposes or just incompetent purposes?
Yeah, I think it's really, really difficult, or one of the reasons that it is so difficult to communicate with people about Bitcoin in relation to its energy usage is because so many of the fundamental understandings that people have, as we were saying earlier, around how energy works, why energy usage is good, and as Haas was saying earlier, it's about emissions, not I forget how you put it, emissions, not like usage, basically, but you used two E words and it sounded better when you said it. The point is, I have found it very difficult to engage with people on this because accepting some of these just truths, they're not like opinions, kind of undermines the way that a lot of people identify themselves. It challenges people's fundamental beliefs about themselves, and it can be a difficult thing to navigate. So I feel like governments will continue to push that narrative in order to manipulate the way that people interact emotionally with this stuff, because ultimately, if you can trigger people emotionally, you can kind of get them to do anything.
Well, so everyone tells a nice story about themselves. They want to feel like they're doing good for the environment. So they purchase an electric vehicle and they feel like they're being greener because they don't smell anything and it's quieter and there's a green sticker on it and there's a bunch of media surrounding it that's telling them a story that it's green. But in reality, they have no idea the environmental impact of just the construction of that vehicle and how long it will take, even under optimum driving conditions, to pay for itself in not using the gasoline that they would otherwise use in a normal combustion vehicle. They have no idea where the electricity that's coming out of the wall is coming from. It's probably coming from a coal plant, by the way. And they have no idea about the mining and the leaching and the chemicals that are going into the earth in China, the labor situation over there, the human impact, the environmental impact. They have no idea. They just tell themselves a story. So this type of we have selective in this state you cannot access electricity because we want to be a greener state or whatever ESG narrative that we're telling ourselves in order to get reelected as a politician, when in reality that just exports the consumption of that electricity or energy somewhere else in the world where there's no oversight or regulation. So other states, other countries, and if it goes over to China, forget about it. It's like the most environmentally destructive way to procure that energy, which is then, it's an externality. It's like a geopolitical externality where they say you can't buy energy here, so you have to do something else, like construct the thing elsewhere where we're not looking at it, and then you can import it here, and then we'll call it green, and you can buy it there, and we'll give you a green credit for it. But it's very disingenuous because you're just shifting the energy use around the world and playing this game where there's no net positive impact on the environment. You're just doing the supply chain game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pass it to Haas for the slam dunk. Haas, break down the numbers on a diesel 8-cylinder or however you measure that against, a Tesla that is powered on a standard American grid.
So the EPA gives like pretty detailed guidance on like the carbon intensity on pretty much every different fuel type you can think of, and they range somewhere in the range of 230 to 280 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt of energy generated. So that's 280. The average US grid is one of the, like, it's not bad. It's one of the better grids, is 480 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. So like basically, and I've mentioned this in one of my articles, that unless like you're charging your Tesla off your own like solar battery array setup, generally speaking, you're better off just sticking to your V8. Like your consumptions are like your emissions are 30 to 40% less. And the stat I dropped earlier that just passenger vehicles were 17,000 terawatt hours of energy used. All land vehicles, including freight, buses, all of that is closer to 27,000 terawatt hours. The world grid is 22,000 terawatt hours. So if we want to all plug our cars into the grid, we have to double the grid, and we double it immediately. So again, I think Aaron's right, and it's a nice story. And I was speaking with Big C Cedric the other week, and I said in addition to being like a PPE stack and all of that kind of stuff, a big part of the battle is just the narrative, telling a good story. Everybody wants to hear a good story. So we are this is what we're doing now is part of the Bitcoin story. We're all telling our stories, putting stories out into the world, and and eventually, I feel those efforts will pay off, and people will feel warm and cuddly about buying Bitcoin. So in terms of the battle of hearts and minds, I think everyone with a mind is already here. It's 13 years in. If you've got a mind, you're in. It might be time to start winning some hearts. And I think Bitcoin's got a lot of heart and can win a lot of hearts. And just as a shout out and sending a heart to direction of Frankie Leray listening in. She's one of the best Bitcoin UX people in the space. I just noticed her pop up now in the listener list.
One thing that I'll mention about why it's hard to reach certain people, right? I don't know how many people on the call are libertarians like myself, and do believe in the hard money thesis of Bitcoin, but there are people who are anywhere from neutral to oppositional to that thesis. And when they look at Bitcoin consuming energy for anything related to it, I think that they think it's 100% waste, right? And not that they're right. I mean, the long history of time will tell them that fiat currencies fall, and they'll be obviously subject to negative outcomes. But in the meantime, they might say, you're expending energy on something for which I think there is absolutely zero benefit, right? And let's just go with them for a second. How else could we reach them? I mean, potentially there's other ways, right? And one reason why I think decentralized identity is this really elegant bridge to people, of that ideological persuasion, is because you don't have to believe in any of the, monetary structures of Bitcoin, in the sense that maybe on the technical level you do, but you certainly don't have to believe in all of that or care about it or even think it's right to think that Bitcoin can give you something that you really want. right? Because I talk to friends on the left, they're leftist authoritarians, and they believe like, hey, we really don't like Google and all these big companies being in charge of things. They still hold similar views there. And so how I pitch it to them is that, yeah, I mean, Bitcoin, for better or for worse, however you think about it, is still enabling you to have an ID system, an identity system that shifts power to you, the user, puts data in your control, and does a bunch of the things that you've been kind of railing about for your own reasons. And so it kind of reaches them from an area that sidesteps a lot of the typical arguments you may run into. So when I'm constructing arguments, when I'm thinking about how to engage someone, when in hearts and minds, as Haas was saying, I try to look at where the person's coming from, like what is the root of their opposition versus the superficial aspects they expose, and then maybe we can talk about benefits that might speak to one individual versus another.
Yeah, I like that idea of. I mean, there are so many. Bitcoin is proving itself to be 10 times, 50 times better than gold. It's building on that, multi-thousand year history of there is actually a use case for a non-state money, a non-state store of value that you hold in your possession that's a bearer asset. And now you can begin with that story, but then also build on top of it. It allows you to code on top of it. It allows you to possess it in a very small amount of space. It allows you to remit to anyone without a trusted intermediary. It has all these features. You can go all the way up the alphabet in terms of the features that it has, and then explain to them why it is valuable in the first place. Because if someone doesn't value Bitcoin, no matter how much energy and how clean we get the mix to be, they'll say it's a waste. They have to understand why it's worth it to spend electricity on this project in order for them to see at all the reason that it should have an impact on the environment, and it is a worthwhile impact on the environment, albeit a very small one. It's going to have something, and they need to understand why. Just like any other thing that we do as a human species, we do have to consume energy in order to bring this thing to the world, which will make the world a better place.
Yeah, I mean, one duality you can kind of throw out there is like, let's say you meet a leftist person, right? You say, hey, and I'm not casting dispersions here, and I'm just kind of trying to play a script out, but hey, you really don't like that, Twitter or Facebook rather was sort of this thing that they say fueled Trump's rise or any of his rhetoric. What if I gave you this decentralized identifier that Bitcoin helps make possible that remove that from being the case? How much would that be worth to you? Would it be worth like 1/4 of the energy you spend on drying your clothes a year? Would it be worth that? Because you seemed really angry about that throughout that election cycle. It was maybe the most angry you've ever been in your life. Would you spend 1/4 of your electricity energy on it? And then to the other people, right? We talk to conservatives. We say, oh man, Twitter is banning people left and right. They're digitally unpersoning you. Why can they do that? Well, because Twitter owns your @ID. So if they want to delete your @ID, guess what? You lose all connections, all DMs, all history, all lineage. Everything's gone. Well, the awesome part is Bitcoin, because of its security, because of its immutable linear history, helps make possible DIDs that give you the ability to own an ID that no other entity owns and controls, like Facebook. So wouldn't it be great if we removed Jack and the sensors and everyone from the middle of that? And all it takes is just allowing Bitcoin to be. And so I think from that perspective, if you pick like sort of a non-controversial thing that speaks to both sides, there's a lot of power in that, because you can you can offer them a carrot, right? And then they kind of forget about the other part that they may not agree with you about.
I really like the framing of a carrot. I definitely think that going back to mining and the off-grid mining, the mining on waste methane, this is something that governments around the world, first world governments, are trying to regulate with sticks, and framing Bitcoin as the carrot incentive to get these producers to be more clean. It's a win-win for everyone. It produces a hard asset that services the world. It's a great perspective. And then, on top of that, talking about other narratives, the work that Gladstein's been doing on Bitcoin Magazine, diving into Bitcoin usage across the world, diving into the horrors of fiat systems across the world. All of that is great fodder that I think is difficult to not get behind I think that there's a lot of great stuff out there in terms of winning the war of emotions and hearts, beyond just the minds. On top of Hass's great work in terms of indexing Bitcoin's energy usage and indexing and documenting and running the numbers on energy usage of other sectors, and doing the work of comparing and showing why Bitcoin isn't even a blip on the radar. And if anyone wanted to meaningfully change the emissions that are happening, they should focus elsewhere. We're kind of getting to a point where we're almost running on 3 hours. My wife is getting cranky and dinner's getting kind of cold, so I think we should close this one out pretty soon. But I guess want to hand it back to you, Hass. I want to give you a last word, and want to definitely make sure that you shill the work you've been doing, the interviews you've done, etc., because you've really been moving the needle, and I don't think that people really understand, the level of work you're pushing out here.
Thanks a lot, CK. Basically, my concluding statements are very easy. Increase demand the best way you know how. I'm happy we settled on that one today. I'll be using that. You can find me on Bitcoin Magazine. All my articles are there. They will take time to get through and read. They are quite information and statistics dense. But I promise you, if you can get through 3 or 4 of my papers, you can put your hand on your heart and say, I've got my head around how Bitcoin energy works and its place in the world. And finally, it's good for ESG. It's good for the environment. It's good for society, and it's good for governance. And you should keep doing what you're doing, and consider migrating to this parallel full stack.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the time, Hass. Thanks so much for the research. Thanks so much for the ammunition to bust FUD and to educate. Thank you to everyone who joined the call, who contributed to the conversation, contributed ideas and facts. So again, this one was a great conversation. For more of these, follow Bitcoin Magazine on Twitter. Go check us out, bitcoinmagazine.com. We're publishing the best work in Bitcoin. And if you want to contribute, editor@bitcoinmagazine.com, or hit us in the DMs, whatever. Hit me up at CK_snarks. But until next time, catch you later, and keep stacking sats. Do it for the people.